Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 917. 917. Let me get my cheat sheet over here. 917. So this is for Monday, August the 14th. 2023, dog days of summer. It's hot. However, it's not hot everywhere. We got a really refreshing air mass coming down the pike. I'm excited. We're going to start to feel some of that here tomorrow into Wednesday and Thursday. We might see some upper 50s in a few of the cooler pockets, which will feel awfully good. But hey, this is the pre-show. This is a magical part of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and occasionally we say really, really, really outrageous things. Yes, and if you're looking for the actual show content, move the slider over about 10 minutes, and that's when it's going to start. We're about 10 minutes before showtime here, but we'll see if we can come up with something outrageous. But school's back. The school programs are back. Yes, I was in Barry, Alabama today. Got a really, really nice cake. In fact, hang on here. I better not do that. That's a disaster in the if I tilt that cake up, it's going to plop right on the keyboard and it will mess the cake up and mess the computer. No, I'm not going to do that. But anyway, it was a very nice first school visit of the 2023-24 school year. And let me tell you what, the kindergarten kids were great. They put the whole school in the gym. This is K through sixth grade. And for incoming kindergarten students, understand they're basically preschoolers right now. And they were just great today. So good to be back in the schools, and has a busy afternoon. Our company does a podcast called Off the Radar, and I did that with Alex Garcia today. Talked about a variety of things related to weather, and then did an internal video with Ken Graham and some folks with the National Weather Service, which was good. Always good to see Ken. He was in, I think, Denver today. But a busy day, but a good day. And for those that are local, just a quick note, we're doing a book signing Saturday in Cullman, Alabama. And this is going to be a joint book signing. I'm really excited about that because Ari Hallmark is going to join me. Ari teamed up with an author, Lisa Rayburn, and they wrote an amazing book about her experience, April 27th, 2011. And for those that don't know the story, Ari lost 5 family members. She lost her parents, grandparents, and a cousin. They were all in the same home. And Ari somehow survived. And she had an amazing journey. And anyway, her book is just really good. And so we're going to have a joint book signing with Ari and Lisa and their book. And then the ones that we have done Saturday at Karma Coffee in Cullman, Alabama. Ari is from a little town called Ruth, which is in Marshall County, which is south of Huntsville. In fact, the same tornado that hit Cullman, Alabama, stayed down and hit her hometown, and that's where she had that tragic loss of life in her family. So again, Cullman, Alabama, Saturday from 9 to noon. Bill Murray is back after a pub crawl.
What was I doing? I guess I was
pub
working.
Crawl.
No pub crawls. You know, one drink gives me a headache, James. I can't even do it. But did you tell all the sixth graders today they smelled bad?
Well, yeah, here's the problem with sixth grade. And I'm telling you, third grade is where it's at. You want to teach third. They understand sarcasm. They have the cognition to learn middle school level science. They are still sweet and they don't smell bad yet. But what happens, you get up in fifth and sixth, okay? So these guys are very odorous. I mean, it's bad. They come in after PE and it's like, it's bad. And so what do they do? What do they do? What do they do? They spray themselves down with Axe, thinking that it's love nectar, that all the girls will just flock to them with this horrific combination of BO and Axe. And it's like a sewage treatment plant. It's basically a cesspool. So that's what happens when you get sixth grade guys going on here. And I will say, for all those years of baseball, occasionally we would give a girl softball player a ride home. In one of those, I want to say it was probably 8th or 9th grade, one of those girls opened up her bag. It smelled like something had died in that thing. How does this sweet girl have this odorous problem in the bag? And she just said, "Oh, that's my shoes." Like it's no big deal. Like, that's my shoes. So I have learned that girls softball players can have odorous shoes in their bag, but they don't have the same axe issue that guys have, where they try and mask the BOs. So
Yeah, I think
anyway,
Title IX allowed them to have BO and odor and all that. I don't think they had it before then.
we had some kid in the dugout. This kid was in the dugout, and he would spray himself down with Axe during a baseball game. And I finally told that kid, I said, you do that one more time. You do that one more time. You're suspended. You're sitting the next game. And you know what? He sprayed himself down with Axe, and that kid sat the next game.
Ooh.
And that ended that train real quick. So I told these clowns, look, forget the stinking Axe. I mean, here's an idea. Go take a shower. It's really not that hard. Soap is not that expensive. Okay. You'll come out ahead here.
Well, I know what to get you for Christmas, James. A nice Axe gift.
Somebody gave me some somewhere in this
I
closet.
The
I have
edition of it.
I have an Axe spray can in here. In fact, yeah, I'm embarrassed. Jen Naramore actually saw my closet. It's embarrassing. My wife said, never let anybody see this place. It's bad. I mean, it's like a landfill in here, but the acoustics are great. I mean, that's
all you need. That's all you need. Is acoustics. Hey,
did
you get that email I sent to that gentleman that you forwarded to me about the balloon launch? Did you get the return copy?
I don't think so.
I'm afraid it was too big with the attachments. I just dropped him an email to see if he.
No, I referred him to you because I knew that you, sir.
Well, I went back and watched that last show where you said all the sixth graders smelled terrible. It was the highlight of the show. But the kids were the highlight of the show. But
anyway, Andrew, I'm sorry. You've stepped into a bad situation here.
He knew what he was getting into.
I've been very intrigued by this deodorant conversation.
Now the question is, do you spray yourselves down with Axe?
He looks like he's still aged.
No, I've actually aged out of Axe. I'm more of a Old Spice kind of guy.
There you go, Old Spice.
Oh yeah. That'll
hard to believe Old Spice is still around. What happened to English leather, James? We used to douse ourselves in lime English leather in 1979. That sounds horrible now.
No. The worst one ever. The worst one ever was high karate.
Oh yeah,
high karate.
Yeah,
that was bad.
A little before my time.
No. That was from my childhood, and let me just say, it was really, really bad.
Our musk oil. You know, we all ran around putting musk on.
Yeah. I miss your musk.
He's like a jukebox of lines from Anchorman.
No. Andrew, I'm sorry. Andrew,
just so the other panelists are showing up, Andrew. Chance to get out.
The time to hang up on us. We're just so you'll know, we're live on YouTube now, and we go live on television in this local market at the top of the hour in like about 3 minutes. And the way it works here, about 75% of the people that consume this, they listen to the audio version. About 25% watch. So that's the standard mix. But we are live here. But we don't go on TV till the top of the hour. So anything that's really outrageous, we try and get it out before the top of the hour. So talking about high karate and English leather and Axe, now's a good time to do it. So.
There's a great article in the Southern Living about Fannie Flagg, and her father worked at she actually wrote an essay for Southern Living a month or two ago. It's just the episode or the edition I picked up, but her father worked at Cinema City 8, James, which is where my first job was in high school. And I cannot remember his name. She tells the story about how he won a malt shop in Gulf Shores as a prize in a poker game. And they went down there and ran this malt shop, and she grew up in the back of it. And I thought, what a fabulous story. But, they got this place on the beach in Gulf Shores, which now would be worth, millions of dollars.
It was a fishing village back then.
Right. Nobody wanted to go there. It was just the place where you turned to go to Florida.
Is Fannie Flagg still with us? Is she still
I think
alive?
so. She must be, or they wouldn't have had her in this magazine
Wow.
article. Unless
I
it
want
was-
to say I looked it up recently because I used to watch Match Game growing up, and I want to say she's still alive.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, her dad
Wow.
was the projectionist, and this was a union position. There were 2 union projectionists, and they literally did very little. They just pushed a button. And on Thursday nights they'd have to change the films out on the reels, because the films came in canisters back then. And but I cannot remember his name to save my life. I got to call my friend Jeff Rowland, who worked there at Cinema City with me, and reminisce about some old times, because he was a funny man.
Jen, did you make it back okay?
She's lost her voice.
She made it back, but her mic doesn't work. And we can't hear a word you're saying.
And you
All
don't
right,
appear to be
hold on.
muted. There you go. Now we heard
Now,
you.
when you said hold on, we heard that.
Got a short.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Hello. I had to
Sing that,
join-
James Adelot.
Of course, you know how to fix it.
Have you tried turning it off and on again? Off and on again. Off and on again. Have you tried turning it off and on again? That normally does the trick.
So you get tech advice
Yeah.
on this show too.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I had to join through my browser because I have to update the app, and so I have to get in there and do that. I didn't know how long that would take. So as long as you can hear me, but yeah, we got back and all settled in. I'll talk a little bit more about it a little later, but it was a fantastic trip. I loved it.
No, we need to hear more of your journeys after I saw you. What was it, Tuesday night?
Tuesday.
I lose track of time. Yeah. But I've tried to keep up with a social media post, and it looked like it was a good, worthy trip. It was worthwhile, I assume.
It was amazing. Yeah.
All right. And welcome to our television viewers, those watching on the TV side. So let's go. I think everybody's here. So let's get the recorders going. Track 1 and track 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. WeatherBrains, episode number 917, the weekly show all about weather. This is for the 14th of August, 2023. Good old summertime. And let's just go right down to the inferno. Troy is, let's see if he's spontaneously combusted. Troy, you okay?
What do you just call me, guys?
Yeah.
Infernal? What?
The inferno, the land of the inferno.
Yeah, I don't know. It's 200 and something today. I mean, who's checking, but I think 107 today at the Bergstrom, brand new record, 2020. 105 was a previous record. I will show you the CF6 that I build every day, and you can see the red marks. Here's Bergstrom. Here's Camp Mabry, first order sites. Everything in red is either above 100. Asterisk indicates a record. Everything since the beginning, really, of the end of June into July. Just amazing.
Goodness.
Yep.
So on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Jen Naramore, who's not dealing with this at all. In fact, you're sending
Thanks, Jen.
You're sending us a blast of Arctic air here that's going to doing here tomorrow. We might see some 50s down here by Wednesday morning. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm out.
Ooh.
Yeah, and not coming to you, that's for sure. Yeah,
Yep.
I saw highs tomorrow in this area, upper 60s. So we've got still a disturbance coming in, and it looks like the clouds are around. So we may be held in the 60s with lows in the 50s, and so I'll take it. Can we heat back up for the weekend? But man, that's nice. I'll take it.
I see Dr. J back on the show. Neil, great to have you. Where are you? How you been?
I'm in North Carolina right now. I spent some time in the wilderness, and so
Now define wilderness for that can mean different things to different people.
Holiday Inn Express is wilderness to me. So I mean,
this was pretty much out of range of NOAA weather radio.
Ooh,
You
that's
can imagine that.
gosh.
Basically in the middle of nowhere in the backwoods of Pisgah National Forest.
So you were not able to get on your phone and tweet or toot or X or
No.
whatever.
No, I had no cell service for several days, and then came back to the usual barrage of texts. Are you alive? Where are you?
Now, when you go on these journeys, are you by yourself, or do you have any folks with you, or?
Most of the time I'm by myself, but this time I actually took the family.
Okay. So, if your wife needed to text you, then she was there anyway. So it's all good. So, and again, let's just say that we are missing Kim tonight and Rick tonight, and I think we're in pretty good shape otherwise here. So, James A., what's happening in Tulsa?
At the risk of getting on Troy's bad side, it's 83 with a dew point of 59 here.
Oh,
Get on my bad side. Get on my bad side.
Continental air. Woo.
Oh, it's
Goodness.
beautiful. We're probably
Had it
looking
with
at
all of you. All of you.
I know.
I've had it.
Neil has a copperhead story for us. Oh boy.
Oh,
no.
really? Oh, we
I'll-
did this.
I'll
Yeah.
send you an
no,
email
no.
with the photo, but showed up at the campsite one day and it had rained the night before, so it was cool, and then the sun came out in the morning, and of course the copperheads come out into the open areas to warm up. And so
How long was this copperhead, Dr. Neil?
there's a couple of them. The longest was maybe 3.5, 4 feet. I'll send you a photo.
What?
You know those
I'm
things will
out of
kill
there.
you.
As soon as I see a copperhead, that's it.
I'm with Troy. Get me back into that 2-star hotel and call it camping.
Yeah.
But I'm the great indoorsman. So
I bet you Neil's like Crocodile Dundee. You know, he's out there cooking breakfast, and casually with one hand he picks up the snake while he carries on the conversation. Do you pick these things up, and how do you deal with it?
I took one of my hiking sticks and just kind of pinned its head down. You pick them up behind the head and relocate him, a couple hundred feet away.
I wonder how Neil gets all these 9 lives experiences.
tastes like chicken.
Yeah.
That sucker be meeting the business end of a hoe.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest before he hangs up on us
Fun.
after this.
Well, we've given him ample opportunity, so he's a glutton for punishment, apparently. So we'll just go with it as it is. Tonight's guest, WeatherBrain, though, is a meteorologist for Excel Energy in Denver. He's a graduate of Penn State University. And a pro tip: if you want to be on WeatherBrains, all you have to do is say that, because Jim will vote you on the show immediately. He's a prolific TikToker. I think he's got about as many followers as you do, James, on that. Andrew Markowitz, welcome to WeatherBrains.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Very excited to finally meet face to face with the legendary James Spann, all of you guys, and excited for what's to come.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here tonight. Thanks for doing it. Tell us how you got interested in weather. That's usually where we start the conversation.
Well, I think this story is going to sound somewhat familiar to a lot of people in this field, but for me, it came when I was at the ripe age of 5 years old. And, what is kind of unique about me versus other people is that I wouldn't say there was a particular storm that kind of got me into weather. It was just a matter of I read a lot of books growing up, was watching the Weather Channel religiously, and I just kind of found myself interested in the science. And then my interest in the big storms, the big hurricanes, the nor'easters, that came a little bit later. And that passion has kind of stuck with me my entire life. So when I was 7 years old, I actually auditioned for a guest weather person contest in Philadelphia at NBC 10 with Glenn Hurricane Schwartz. And this was a contest of people that were predominantly twice my age, 14, 15-year-olds, and they ended up choosing me. And that was a memory, just being on TV for the one day doing the weather, that just always stuck with me. And it always felt like kind of a destiny for me. And that passion kind of stuck with me through my education, through elementary, middle, high school. I became kind of famous for making predictions for snow days and predicting how much snow we would get. And it was kind of nice to, be relied on for that. And that's kind of what drove me to being a meteorologist as a career, the idea that I could do something that I love, but also that I could actually make a difference in people's lives, because weather affects pretty much all facets of society in some capacity. So that kind of inspired me to go to Penn State. I also went to weather camp, which is a real thing, and it's exactly what you might imagine if you're not aware of it. And that's kind of what locked me in on Penn State versus some of the other schools. So I went to the Penn State University, got a meteorology degree, but also supplemented that with a degree in energy, business, and finance, because I was kind of interested in that sector as well from my grandfather growing up. And it's just kind of propelled me on this career path as a meteorologist in the energy sector, and just kind of on the side doing whatever I can to find creative ways to tell ordinary people about the weather to ideally keep people safe.
I was going to ask you what a fun and interesting fact about you that not many people know is. So I think you've already covered that. Getting to be with Glenn, he's of course been on here once or twice, and it's just an amazing experience to get to talk to him, because I of course watched him on the Weather Channel. Jim, was he at the Weather Channel when you were around there doing radio, or was that before that? He was probably way before that. Way before that. Yeah. I remember back to when the Weather Channel came on the air. I had to go to the neighbor's house because we didn't have cable, and the dad would invite me over to watch the Weather Channel with him, and that was a lot of fun. 4 or 5 hours of watching that. But I kind of came up the same way, Andrew. So you went into energy. How did you sort of fall into it, or was that by design? Is that something that you had studied a lot about, or something that you just picked up?
Well, so going into college, my idea of a meteorologist is kind of what an average person would think, that there was the weather service, there was being on TV, and that was about it. I wasn't entirely sure of the possibilities that I could be in this field. And in hindsight, kind of wish I did, because college is certainly not cheap. And I wish I would have known that to get a more informed decision. But when I went to college, Penn State has various tracks in their meteorology department in terms of things that you can supplement. And one of the things that appealed to me was this energy business and finance, this weather risk track, which is kind of taking your traditional meteorology jobs, but then applying it to businesses and the finance world. And so I always kind of figured that if meteorology didn't work out, that was kind of the path that I would take. But this was an opportunity that I could actually combine both of these things that I found interesting. And thankfully, I was able to land a job in the energy sector about a year and a half after graduating, and have kind of been working my way up from there. So I wouldn't say that that's something that I was aware of early on. It was something that I discovered. And then once I did, I was pretty much locked in that was the way I wanted to go. And I wanted to do whatever I could to get there.
So talk to us for a minute about what you do in your role, sort of what your job description is a little bit, and how it relates to traditional meteorology.
Yeah. So the idea of an energy meteorologist, and the most intuitive way to think about it is, if we think about energy demand, when people are using energy the most, it's on very hot, very cold days, people using their ACs and using their heat. So if you are an energy meteorologist, you're predicting temperatures for certain parts of the country, but then that's applied to a model that predicts what the average energy demand is at each hour of the day. And from there, there's kind of two different perspectives that could be worked on. There's the idea of a trader who can kind of see this as, because there's a correlation between the amount of energy demand and the prices on the commodity market. So a trader can kind of see, if we had an in-house forecast versus what the market is thinking, then that could give that person an advantage to kind of put him or herself in a better financial position. So that's kind of one aspect of it. But then the other aspect is, if you're working for a utility company, well, you have a lot more responsibility, because you are responsible for the livelihood of everyone in your area. You are trying to make sure that the lights stay on for everybody. You are doing whatever you can to make that happen. So as a meteorologist, by predicting the temperatures, you're predicting what the demand would be. And as a utility company, your role is trying to figure out, do we have the capacity and the resources to adequately meet that demand? So in addition to predicting what the energy demand is going to be, you also want to see things like wind and solar, which have become more and more of a percentage on grids cross country. It's going to become even more so over the coming years. And you kind of have to figure out, do we have the capacity to do that? If not, do we have to import from other regions of the country? And aside from that, there's kind of a long-term balance too of, there's a transition to green energy, some of it mandated, some of it on their own initiative, companies or whoever's own initiative. And there's the balance between, trying to go green, and then also trying to make sure that we actually have the resources when you retire all these coal units. So, every day I kind of picture it as a puzzle that we try to solve. You have your temperature forecast, and then all that goes into all these other things that ultimately help a lot of people. So that's what I find fascinating, is that I wake up and every single day, I go in and I know that the work that I did was meaningful.
Andrew, Troy here. I just kind of wonder, have you been watching all the stuff from Maui? I bring that up because of the catastrophe that's occurred there. And every time I look at this, they're saying that we're going to have to look at more in these and we're dealing with the wildfire situation, here, a very high fire danger. And I'm wondering if utility companies, we're going to see more and more meteorologists. I know we have quite a few that have gotten into that field like you have, but I'm wondering if even more will go now, because these utility companies have got to have more meteorological support, not just for the everyday energy use things, but, how to try to be proactive with some of this. That situation in Hawaii is just unbelievable. But when you start looking at the meteorological reasoning and how it happened and what we think happened, we've got to start looking at this more proactively. Where are all the warnings? Why couldn't they get out? I think all this stuff's got to be looked at. And I'm just wondering, being someone, Andrew, involved in energy, if you paid much attention to that. It's you look at what happened out there and you almost turn away from it. It's just so devastating for those folks. But I kind of wonder what your thoughts were.
Well, I would say the closest parallel to that situation from another experience, and this is kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, but that February 2021, that polar vortex that impacted Texas, for me, I think that it was a wake-up call for a lot of people who thought this type of disaster does not happen in this part of the country, myself included. I mean, I like the meteorology makes sense of it, but it's not something that was really on my radar until it was happening. And, unfortunately, as people who are supposed to be the ones that are on top of things and warning everybody, we kind of have the onus of that. So, that's kind of the thing that I'm fearful of, is that with all of the changing patterns happening in the coming years, we're going to be seeing not only perhaps more disasters, but also we're going to be seeing them in places that do not have the infrastructure to accommodate that. So another example from this year, the Canadian wildfires, which have been by far the worst you've ever seen. And, not even just the fires themselves, but the air quality that's been impacting the East Coast, things like that have never happened. So, I think one of the biggest things when we talk about resiliency is just, preparing for these disasters we may have never seen in our lifetimes that, may actually become more plausible. And you look at the meteorology behind what happened in Hawaii, something like that is pretty plausible. You had a tropical system, then a high pressure system, the pressure gradient in between. Right. The meteorology of that makes a lot of sense. And it's like something like that is plausible, but I do wonder, is this something that maybe we shouldn't have overlooked? Is there more that we could have done to kind of highlight that, as opposed to when it was already happening and people were just kind of stranded on the island? I mean, I think it took a lot of people by surprise, even people, like us who are degreed Mets.
Yeah. Well, another thing too is I shouldn't be surprised, but I think I didn't sit here but 15 minutes this morning in the 6 or 7 o'clock hour on Fox Business, and there's the first story of the first lawsuits filed in Hawaii already against the utility.
Hey, Troy, who started these fires? Do we know who started these things?
Andrew may have a little more insight, but from what I've read, the winds, the pressure gradient winds, downslope winds into that area had kind of experienced, a little bit of a flash drought. So it was very dry, or that was a dry side anyway, downslope. And if you see that video, Andrew, of some of the pictures people first took of the winds at 6 o'clock in the morning, and power lines are just plopping around all over the place in the air. And apparently they just arced and some of them hit the ground and we're off to the races. That's what I'm hearing. And so the questions now come up, and Andrew knows this, and we've all kind of heard. The question is, okay, why aren't we doing the same thing we do in California and deactivate those grids in advance of these events?
And yeah, because I looked at Maui, and it seems like they have these fires on a fairly regular basis, but not to this extent. Yeah. There's just something different about it, and I can't wrap I just can't. I guess it's going to take some time to determine the cause of this.
Yeah,
but
I think you're right, James. I don't think they're not natural to Hawaii, though.
Well, I don't. It sure didn't take long for the damn lawsuits to hit. Within a few days, and of course,
I did invite Elizabeth Pickett tonight to be on the show, but they're way too busy to come and talk to us.
Neil, do you know what are your thoughts on the Hawaiian wildfires in Maui?
I mean, what I'm hearing is they had a ton of rain last year, so they had probably above average fuel. And then, I mean, typically that side of Maui is pretty dry. I mean, people think Hawaii's lush, but I've been there. It's just nothing but like dirt and cactuses.
Yep.
And when you get a bunch
considered
of
tropical desert, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it just and if what they say is true about the previous year's rain and the additional brush and the winds, it was just, probably bound to happen as soon as a high wind event hit with the power lines, assuming that's the cause.
But I mean, burn all the way to the ocean, run people into the ocean to save themselves.
Terrifying.
Tell me when we've heard that lately. It's like James said, unbelievable.
It just says something. I don't. There's something we don't know about this story. There's just something else that I think we don't understand. But it will surely come out in time. But whatever, just a horrible situation. Horrible.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, Andrew, thanks for being on with us tonight talking about this. Are you aware of any other utilities that preemptively deactivate the power grid when certain wind conditions are met or in combined with humidity level, like I think it's PG&E that does that in California?
Yep, they do.
But you've got to think that is an enormous inconvenience for people as well, because you have to deactivate a much larger part of the power grid than what would probably be affected at least first by a fire.
True.
And you've got medical cases, home dialysis people. People need electricity. It's been a boom for generator sales in California, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really speak for specifically what each utility company is doing, but I'm sure, every utility company has some sort of procedure in place for if conditions are met, whether it's as the event is ongoing or for detection. I mean, like we were saying before, these events, all these companies need to be looking at this as kind of an example of, hey, this can really happen in more places than we can imagine, maybe places that we had never had procedures in. And so I would hope that whether it's a utility company or any private sector company, that they're taking a hard look at this and saying that, yeah, we really need to be increasing our resiliency to this, or at least having a more concrete plan in place. It's not just about mitigation. We don't want to get to the mitigation. We want to get to the prevention, ideally.
Well, I just don't think these utility companies can take a 30 to 40% hit in their value. And that's what's happened to the utility on the island out there. Their stock price today was 40% off. I mean, from last week prior to this. So I don't know. But I'm with James and everyone else that you cut the power off. What are the unintended consequences then? And so I really think you're going to see more and more meteorologists getting involved with this with time. I really believe that. And so I was going to ask Andrew, you were interested in television at first. Did you just run from that after a while, or did you say, "Oh, whoops"?
Well, television was kind of the thing that was what appealed to me growing up, just watching all these meteorologists on TV and just saying, hey, I want to be that guy that's giving the weather on the local news. But unfortunately, coming to college, I learned more and more about how tough it is at the beginning. And, it's just not something that would have been feasible for me. The idea of moving far away to a small town, working very odd hours, probably not going to be able to really see my family, not making a lot of money when, I had pretty substantial student loan debt coming out of college. So just adding that together, I felt like there's a fairly low probability of making it to where I wanted to be in life. And so just all that together, I felt like my calling was somewhere else. And that's kind of what drew me into the TikTok space and the social media. It's that I could still utilize the elements of broadcast that I was interested in, that I had picked up on from my campus weather service, and still talk to people while also doing a job that was better suited for my interests and the things that I was looking to get out of life.
Well, I'm proud of you, because I tell students all the time, I never seen a person that wasted so many damn electives in his life as I did back in college. But you look at those opportunities. There goes James from Tulsa. We wasted those. And I tell students nowadays, diversify, anticipate the unexpected, that you might be able to find something you really, in your heart of hearts, you really like. And you're still in your primary area, but you're doing it differently. And that, Andrew, is what you've done. And my goodness, look at James Spann. He made $92 last week. And
yeah,
he's monetizing it as well. But I'm really proud of what you've done, Andrew.
Yeah, and I just wanted to elaborate on the point that you were making about diversifying your skills. And one of the things that I've done since graduating college, I've been on a couple AMS boards, including being the chair of the Board of Private Sector Meteorologists. And first of all, a lot of people, a shocking amount, I would say, are just unaware of the opportunities outside of the traditional meteorology jobs. But I always like to tell people, if you're going to go for meteorology, do meteorology +1, some other specialized skill that's going to differentiate you over someone else. And it's not only that specialized skill that's going to open up more possibilities, but if you think about what goes into a meteorology degree, there's a lot more that we can do with it than we realize. And, I think it's a real shame that people are not aware of this when they're deciding to pay tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on an education for college. I think that we are doing a disservice to people to not have that information readily available.
Well, I think when we talk about Maui, the big area, and James from Tulsa, I mean, we have a lot of people that are looking at emergency management. I do it nowadays, but I never went and got I'm serving emergency management at the University of Texas now and as incident meteorologist up there. But that's a big area you're seeing, and I'm really proud of meteorologists that are getting involved in that because I think they'll be very important into the future.
So, Troy, we were talking in the chat about the grid in Texas. I don't think we answered the question out loud. How's the grid done this summer with all the extreme heat you've had?
Yeah, I think the grid's held up pretty well. I'm not convinced that we're past our problems. That was sort of a unique event, as Andrew talked about back in February 2021. Believe me, I always try to forget about that as much as I can. It got me a generator about 20 feet that way and got me a rebuilt house. But I'm not sure. I'm still not quite convinced yet that Texas is beyond the problems. But so far, so good. And I don't know, Andrew, what you think. I mean, kind of looking at it, yeah.
So, Andrew, are there any other impactful events? I mean, we know heat and cold extremes are important to utilities. Are there any other events that we might not be thinking about that can cause issues or concerns?
Yeah, so I want to answer Troy's question first. So, I can't really speak on what exactly ERCOT has done since February 2021. I'm sure they've had a lot of people reviewing their procedures, but I will say that the one clearest difference between today and 2023 versus over 2 years ago is they've really ramped up their wind and solar generation. And, as we were talking about, as a utility company, your goal is to kind of find ways to adequately meet demand. So having all these tens of gigawatts more than we did before, that is a much bigger war chest you have to play with versus what we did before. Now, unfortunately, those are very weather dependent. Like if you have an ice storm coming in, that's going to knock out a lot of, some of the wind farms for who knows how long, or if you have a cloudy day, the solar gen's not going to work. So that's why something like that may be somewhat fallible, but still there is more of a war chest compared to a couple of years ago. And that's kind of a trend that is likely occurring with other utilities.
But also to some degree, Andrew, I got to think that we had that occur over again. Please don't let it happen. But if we dealt with that all over again, I think we would find ourselves in a world of hurt again. Just because of the wind, a lot of that being, we had freezing and frozen precipitation and everything else, and a lot of cloud cover. But I don't know. I just sort of sitting down here in the middle of Texas and kind of wonder about it. And every Monday at noon, when it comes time for that Generac to kick in for 5 minutes and test, I just smile. So.
Well, there is certainly reason to be skeptical of that. And, I can't say one way or the other if I think it's going to hold up in the winter. I mean, we've had 2 winters since then. And from what I recall, there weren't any blackouts, at least if there were any, nothing compared to 2020. Now, obviously we haven't had a storm to that magnitude since then, but, hopefully they've reviewed that and they've done whatever they can to weatherize in advance. I think it was a wake up call, not just for the utility, but for a lot of people that things like this can happen.
Well, in the city of Austin, we lost probably 40% of the grid, but it was, Andrew, a problem where Austin Energy had tried to do maintenance and trying to keep trees off of power lines and things like that, and people simply refused to let them on the property. They said, "We love our trees, don't touch our trees." And those are the people I hope that were without power for 4 days because they deserve to be. You've got to let the energy companies come in here on above ground distribution networks, and you've got to have it maintained. It's sort of like the forest and the fires that we're seeing. People think, with these burn areas, leave my forest alone. Well, that's great until you pile up enough fuel below it that it incinerates a couple of towns downstream. So I believe it the same way. Utilities should be able to go in above ground lines and do their maintenance. And in Austin, there were a lot of people that would not let them do it.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the greater good that matters. So
Yeah.
you got to let the utility company do their thing. And
Yep.
I'd rather have everybody have their lights on than protect one tree. I mean, hopefully people can become a little less selfish if they understand the bigger picture of what that means.
Agree.
So, Andrew, the New York Times had an amazing story about a 1940 solar tornado, because we always think about the Carrington event and, big events like that, what impact they may have. But this thing apparently was, really bad over a much more concentrated area. What are y'all looking at in terms of CMEs and with an active sunspot, phase coming up again, how's that going to impact things?
I mean, I will say that's not something that our team is actively looking at, but I'm sure, it may throw a wrench into things. I'm not sure how large of a scale would be. It may only be on a smaller scale, but, I'm sure as we get closer, it is something we'd have to monitor a bit.
I bet that becomes more and more of an emphasis. I'm sure that utilities are working on that. Dr. Neal, you had some questions. Why don't you go?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to talking about the trading side of this. It's my understanding, and like many jobs ago, I actually worked for a firm that did some trading stuff. What you do is you're firewalled from the traders, right? As someone who helps manage the grid operations. How does that work?
So, I mean, there's a fundamental difference here between someone who works for a private sector company and someone who works for a utility company. And so there are some utility companies that have traders on staff. Their goals are mainly to try to, I guess, manage a company's portfolio, to try to, I guess, figure out they kind of have the same idea. They're trying to figure out how the market's going to behave and try to take advantage of, do we need to purchase these resources or whatnot? Whereas when I was working at a private sector company before this, the goal was simply to try to take advantage of these market discrepancies. And, it was just kind of for the personal benefit of either that person or the firm. Whereas for a utility company, their goal is still with the utility company in mind.
So I guess that sort of leads into my second question. So like going way back, like to the days of Enron, when people first started trading like weather derivatives and stuff, particularly like in the natural gas markets. Why was the trading world so fixated on the 12Z GFS? And everyone knew it was never going to be right at like the day 5 to 10 range, but that's what drove the markets for like 20 years.
Well, I can tell you that 20 years later, not much has really changed with that. We still have a lot of people who rely on the GFS, and people know that it's not really reliable. But at the end of the day, there are people that care about it, and it does move the market. So I think it's more so that the handful of people that still believe in it, they're the ones that kind of drive it. I think a lot of people just kind of disregard it. I think everyone knows that euro is the king. But yeah, I think it also has to do with probably the timing of the trading day. The 12Z GFS usually comes out between 10:30, 11:30 a.m. So that's kind of ripe for intraday trading, or I guess if people were making long-term plays as well. But yeah, people still look at the GFS, for the strengths that it has and the deficiencies that we're all very much aware of.
So it's just, I guess you can't wait for the euro to come out because everyone's already put their trades in.
I mean, it depends on the firm, but with our job, by the time the euro runs, the market is already closed, or at least where we're trading. So at least when it comes to this time of year, when in the winter, when you have the extra hour, then you get to see the euro come in. But right now, there are some places where they're not able to trade past that. The GFS is pretty much all you have, or the ensembles, the GFS ensembles.
Are you doing much on Excel's side with wind energy, like short range, near term forecasting?
I mean, so most utility companies, ourselves included, we do make wind generation forecasts. And again, a lot of that is kind of putting that puzzle together with the temperatures of trying to figure out what your net load is going to be for the day. So net load, for those of you who are not aware. So that's basically taking your energy demand, but then minus your wind and your solar generation.
I don't know. I don't know if you all still do this or not. I remember talking to some people at NCARS. This is probably 10 or years ago or more. And at one point they were pulling power information off the turbines and trying to extract out a wind value from that and then assimilate that into a short-term predictive model of wind. Is that still a thing? Did that ever go anywhere?
I mean, I'm not necessarily sure if that goes into our models. I mean, we just kind of, there's a lot of different things that kind of go into it. So I imagine it may play somewhat of a role here. I guess it really depends on each utility company. Some utility companies, it's more so like you may get your information from vendor. Others, just they have their own models that they run with a variety of different conditions.
What about the solar generation world? I mean, we hear like in my life now with NWP, everyone talks a lot about like, 80-meter hub height winds and stuff, but I don't hear a lot of conversation about forecast for shortwave downward radiation or cloud cover. Is that being used?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely being used. And solar, I mean, there's certainly quite a bit of variability with wind, but I think right now solar, if I had to say, is less predictive. And, a lot of that has to do, if you think about it, with how unpredictable it can be to predict where thunderstorms are going to develop. Well, you think about how that relates to where the wind and the solar farms are. It's that, if you have a thunderstorm that develops over a large solar plant, that could knock out a pretty significant amount of generation for the day. And, that can cause some major issues. So, because of that unpredictability, there's also certain terrain issues you may have to deal with in certain parts of the country. Like, for example, if you get a fog in the morning or specifically freezing fog, that can certainly cause some issues. So, because of all of these different variables at the mesoscale, microscale level, in addition to what you're normally looking at, it just makes it extremely complicated to forecast.
And Andrew, talk about anything that relates to AI, the Internet of Things, smart grids, any technologies that are going to kind of change the face of what you do and what, the energy sector does.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, I'm not entirely sure what each utility company is going to be using with AI. I mean, AI, I think there are certainly some pros to it. There's one way that you could look at it, that it's going to be making, a lot of the things that are grunt work, whether it comes to personnel or things that are much more tedious, they could speed things up and make it so something can maybe be done much faster, perhaps instantly. But then, of course, you've got some pitfalls of that, and where, someone who uses AI that, first of all, in my testing with AI, so I've kind of played around with a little bit with meteorology, and I find that, if you're trying to find very basic weather information or just basic information about a subject, it'll give you like a nice little summary. But when it comes to anything advanced, not even close to being at that stage. So if we're talking long-term implications of how it relates to our field, I do think that that's going to be hastening the transition of someone who's purely a forecaster, who's a meteorologist, to being someone who is more of a translator. It's like, okay, well, we can get this information. I think one day AI might be as good as the models. I think there's still a lot of work that can be done. And at that point, it would be, you're just kind of taking that information. You realize, okay, where is it good? Where are the deficiencies here? And you're translating that in a way that a lot of people would use for whatever they need, whether it's someone who's using that information to power a grid, or if it's just someone who's trying to plan for an event just in some capacity. So yeah, AI, it's really going to be changing the game. It feels like it's been really speeding up with how quickly it's taken over our society. It felt like not even a year ago, it wasn't really a part of our daily lives, and now it seems to be everywhere.
It was on the front of every Byte magazine in 1981 when I was at Stanford University in the physics and computer science room. And it only took it 50 years to get to the forefront here somehow. But that's pretty fascinating. Talk about public awareness, the role of that process that the utilities take in terms of educating people about this intersection of weather, energy, and climate. Andrew, how is that going?
Well, I think there is a lot more work that can be done. I mean, just anecdotally talking to a lot of people and saying that I work as a meteorologist for a utility company, most people don't even know that even exists. So I think, I'm not exactly sure how we solve the problem, because I think utility companies are kind of a boogeyman for wherever you are. They're the ones who raise your rates, and nobody is really happy about paying their electric bill. So nobody really tries to think about, hey, there's actually a reason why these bills are behaving like they do. So a lot of that, it's very complex to be able to communicate that to an average person. I think there's certainly a lot more that we could do, not just from a meteorology perspective, but just as someone who works there in general. And like I was saying before, this isn't really happening at the university level either, with the amount of people that I've interacted with at even very large meteorology programs, relatively speaking, that don't even know this exists. So clearly there is some type of gap in terms of the awareness that this even exists, and then how a meteorologist plays into that. There's a lot more that we could do.
And talk about working with policymakers, because that's obviously a challenge too. And we touched on it a little bit probably on the grid. It sounds like some folks did get a little smarter, maybe in some ways down there from that huge event that we had in 2021. But, they play a key role in going forward.
Well, and, because of policy, this isn't just at a federal level. This also comes down to the state and local level. So, I would say one of the biggest ways that this would probably be felt with a grid would be the idea of this transition to more green energy, so the wind and the solar generation. And, there are some states that are more aggressive with the transition, others not so much. Now, obviously, not every state can really behave the same way because, if you think about it, wind and solar generation cannot be, doable at every part of the country. It needs to reach a certain threshold of percentage of sunny days and a certain average wind speed. So, there are some states that they would love to be able to go green. They just can't. They don't have the resources to do that. So, it does make things tricky because, again, there is kind of a balance here between this initiative of going green, but also making sure, hey, we don't want to turn off all of our coal plants overnight, because then we're going to have to deal with blackouts on a more consistent basis. That is a problem that pretty much every utility company in the country has to deal with. It's this balance between, going with these long-term policies that are implemented by either a governor or on the federal level and just what is actually going to be feasible. So it's a really delicate balance here because, some of that is, you kind of do have to play politics a little bit, or at least there's some kind of narrative that politicians kind of want to play here, even though, if you dig beneath the surface, there's actually a lot more that goes into it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Southern Company just brought a nuclear plant on in Georgia near Augusta. Is that just going to be a one-off going into the future, Andrew, or do y'all talk about that at all? No, maybe not on the meteorology side, but plant was extremely expensive, but apparently going to be very beneficial and important to their power generation in the Southern Company.
Well, the nuclear energy is something that a lot of utility companies are exploring. That's another thing that's very controversial. So, at the end of the day, the utility company is trying to figure out ways that, we can power the grid on, whatever need or whatever way that we can. And so, we're going to have to look for other solutions as well. So nuclear could be something that's on the table again, but just because of some of the stigmas associated with it, that's not something that's, being championed as much as the wind or the solar.
Yeah. So you talked a lot about young professionals, giving a lot of advice. What other ancillary sales and knowledge skills are critical for success in this evolving field?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, you need to have some semblance of communication skills. You can know all of the science behind meteorology, but at the end of the day, if you don't know how to translate that in a way that an average person can understand and actually use to, take whatever decisions they need to, then it's worthless. So, I think that even if you're not interested in broadcast, that taking a broadcast class or, doing an extracurricular activity, that's only going to help you. And that's not just coming with verbal communication. That also comes with your ability to write. Like, I think writing to different audiences, one of the most helpful things that I've ever done in my life was there was an assignment where we basically had to give a weather briefing, but it was for multiple different audiences. So, for example, someone who was an emergency planner, someone who was maybe a kindergartner, someone, you know, who was a professor, just 3 different levels where you're saying the same thing, but in a way that all of them can understand. And that's what I think, you know, every student in the and this isn't just exclusive to meteorology. This is true for every other field. But I do think that if you want long-term success, communication is very important. I would also say programming, the better that you can do with that, the more languages you can learn, that would certainly be helping you. But, you know, just meteorology and any specialized skill, like GIS is another good one. I know some people that are in, that have taken a Spanish minor, just being able to translate that to, you know, a growing population that speaks Spanish, whether you're going to broadcast or anything else. But again, and we think about the classes that go into meteorology. You've got calculus, you've got physics, you've got chemistry, you've got statistics. So you think about all of those skills, it's kind of comparable to someone who's getting an engineering degree. So you think about it from that perspective, and those skills can easily be applied to things outside of meteorology. I call it meteorology adjacent skills. And, you know, with that, again, it's not always easy to really find those jobs. And sometimes because of the way that the system works, you don't always get a foot in the door because you're automatically rejected by some sort of AI. That's what kind of makes it difficult. But, you know, I think whatever specialized skills that you can get, whatever experiences that you can get with communication, I would say the other thing is just doing whatever you can to get a mentor, because having a mentor through the AMS and also just kind of my own initiative, if I didn't do that, there's no way I would have gotten to where I have so quickly in my career. And, you know, that person has been someone that has given me a lot of insight about the energy sector, just being a young professional in meteorology. And that's kind of what's propelled me forward. And now as a, you know, mid-20s young professional, I feel like I have the obligation to pay it forward to the next generation. And that's kind of what inspires me.
So while we have let's stop here for breaking news for just a minute. So while we have a second here, you got, so for those that are watching, let's discuss this real quick. Okay. We have a photo of Dr. Neil and the Copperhead situation. So Neil, give us a description here. Go for it.
It was just, you know, hanging around the campsite. It's kind of what they do after a cold night and a warm day. They come out and lay around in the sun in the cleared areas, which also happens to be where you would normally pitch your tent. And the last thing I wanted to do was get bit in my sleep through the tent. So just go round up the copperheads and in the morning and take them someplace safe, like a couple 100 yards away from your campsite, and let them go in the bushes.
And Kim just joined us. She has to wonder, what in the world has she stepped into here? Kim, I'm sorry you had to join at this point.
Neil, are the copperheads very aggressive? Because I know water moccasins or
no,
I don't think they are. That's why I wondered.
They're not aggressive at all, but that's
Okay.
kind of what makes them dangerous is that they will just sit there, and most people actually get bit by accidentally stepping on them because they're so well camouflaged.
Kim, what do you think?
I think he said copperheads, which means
Yeah,
multiple
it was
snakes.
plural.
As
It was
he just
definitely plural.
casually went around the campsite and, well, let's just kick around some snakes in the morning. That sounds so beautiful. What a lovely time nature must be with you, Neil.
Just another 9 lives event, Dr. Kim.
Look at the ground behind him too. I mean, you can
Looks
see
just
how
like
well
it.
that camouflage is amazing.
Now, I've got another photo of this one before I moved it, and you literally have to stare really hard at the photo to see the snake.
How did you see it?
Well, because there was another one sitting next to it, and that one moved, and I saw the movement.
Yeah. Never found a copperhead, Neil, at a Holiday Inn Express. So
Behind the waffle maker.
yeah, behind the waffle.
Troy, I have a story when the statute of limitation runs out from about 20 years ago that I'll
No
tell.
problem.
You may not want it. You may not. You may have to eat
thank
those
you.
words.
What's happening?
All right, so let's kind of pivot back over to Andrew here, and I wanted to talk about social media and communicating weather. And you are in the world of TikTok. And if you watch this show, you've heard me say this. I mean, when I turn on TikTok, people are doing one of three things: they're dancing, they're being funny, or they're cussing. One of the three. And now I will say, of late, I've turned it on, and I get a lot of these. Hello, men ghost me when they find out that and they point. And it always says I'm 50 or 55 or something. So these middle-aged ladies prancing around half naked on there, but they're usually dancing or they're cussing or they're funny. So Andrew, I got to say, which one of those three are you doing there?
Sometimes I throw in some jokes, so I'd say probably number two.
Funny. No. I in fact, while we were doing the show, I pulled it up and I followed you on the talk here. So, but in all seriousness, it is so refreshing to see a professional meteorologist pushing information on this platform. And we can joke about it all day, but you're going to reach a demographic here that they're important. Every people group, they're all important. And so it is so refreshing to see a professional doing this. So how'd you get started in that platform?
Yeah. So, kind of the background of this. So during the COVID lockdowns, I felt that was kind of a very introspective time for me, that I kind of reflected on, the things that I really wanted to do in life. And one of the things that I kind of surmised was, hey, I want to start doing these videos. And originally I just did very low quality videos that went up on Instagram. They didn't really get much traction. And then during the pandemic, a lot of people downloaded TikTok, and I didn't originally because, the target demographic I thought was the same as Musical.ly, and it was just 14-year-olds dancing. That just wasn't for me. So I didn't download it. But then after a little bit, I started seeing things that came on my feed, and they were actually kind of funny. Like people were posting memes or like just kind of lip syncing a sound and being funny. And I thought, all right, like that would be entertaining. And I was on there, like I was enjoying myself. It was very addicting. But then the summer of 2020, I started to notice that a lot of these people were kind of more serious. They were more informative. They were talking about things that were very niche. And those videos were getting a lot of traction, and people were becoming very interested in it. And so I kind of got to thinking, it's like, if people can be interested in these very niche things like crocheting, who's to say that people wouldn't be interested in the weather? And so I decided in late 2020, 2021 to start making videos about the weather. And it really was not going well for a while. They got maybe a couple hundred views at most. And I just was at the point where I was just going to give up. I was not going to be a TikToker. But what intrigued me about TikTok versus the other platforms is that the way the algorithm works is a lot different. So with Instagram and Twitter, you're kind of siloed by the amount of followers you get. That's who gets your information. It's your followers. And so you have to build that up. Whereas with TikTok, no matter who you are, even if you're someone with a profile picture that's of a cartoon character with 0 followers, your video could theoretically be pushed out to anybody in the world, or at least a demographic that you're targeting. And that is something that's very powerful. And so after a lot of trial and error, we get to the end of 2021, beginning of 22, and I started making videos about snowstorms in New England. And those started getting tens, if not hundreds of thousands of views. And, I just kind of rode that momentum. And then it kind of really took off in September of last year during Hurricane Ian, where I started to get enough followers that I was able to do live streaming. And during that week leading up to the hurricane, I was basically on live for, I'd say 3-4 hours a day, sometimes even more. And at one point I was getting as many as 7,000 people watching at once. In total, I think I got about 1.5 million people tuning in over that week. And, a lot of it was just people asking questions, but then I would get some people in the comments that were like, hey, should I evacuate my family? And that's kind of when it hit me that, hey, I'm actually the one that people are turning to for weather information that could end up saving their lives. And to me, that's a very important responsibility. So you put that together, and there's a lot of fake news, misinformation, clickbait that goes around in the weather sector, some prominent YouTubers. And, in some ways, I kind of empathize with them because you kind of do have to play the game, so to speak, on social media. And that, in order for your videos to kind of get past the algorithm and get pushed out to more people, you do have to be dramatic to some extent. And I've kind of noticed that on my videos too, where it's no coincidence that the videos that get the most are the ones that are the bigger storms. And so you do kind of have to play the game because you do have to grab people's attention in the first couple seconds in order for more people to watch it. That's kind of what the algorithm kind of rewards you for. It's like watch time, people sharing it, and if people aren't interested in your content in the first 2 milliseconds, that's it. Your video is done. So there is kind of a balance you have to strike, but generally, my continued presence on TikTok is just kind of being the voice of reason among all of the nonsense that people pick up on the internet. Just being someone who actually does have credentials and can explain things in a way that people can understand. And I would say the other element of this that's interesting, and I'm sure the TV guys here can back me up here, is that there are a lot of people who are now cutting the cord. They are no longer tuning into local news as much or even at all. So because of that, there is a void in the market that people that are trying to capitalize that I think has not fully been capitalized yet. And so, right now, I think that void is being filled by people who are not necessarily credentialed to do so. And so I want to be the person that steps in that place and gives the information to people that they can actually use. So, that's kind of what's inspired me. And, it was a lot of trial and error. There's still things even today that I'm trying to figure out. But, at the end of the day, my goal is kind of the same as when I first got into meteorology, is just to try to reach as many people as possible to keep people safe and weather aware.
This is all so interesting. And especially to me, I have held off on getting in on TikTok for a number of reasons. And it's just one of those really interesting platforms, isn't it? That seems so enticing, but has so many anxieties that can be attached to it. I'm curious, as you're talking about being this reasonable voice in the madness, some other social media platforms are designed in such a way that people who are experts are sort of forced to or almost encouraged to interact with each other. So you see a lot of this infighting of people who will say, oh, here's my whatever spectacular forecast, ripping the 384-hour GFS off and, putting out this like crazy solution. And then people, other experts will come and tear them down. And, you just have this back and forth. Is any of that happening in weather TikTok, or are you guys able to sort of just live like parallel existences? What is that social media aspect like?
Well, I would say for the most part, everyone just kind of stays in their own lane. It's that, people that follow you, they're only going to be seeing your content. They're not even going to be seeing these other people that are coming after you. If anything, maybe they'll post a comment, or in a worst case, they'll post a stitch, which is when they take a few seconds of your video and splice it and then make their own video. So, I mean, in that case, theoretically, it could be kind of the same drama that you see on other social media platforms, but it's basically, for I think a lot of people, it's just you make your own content and then that's all you see, or at least, you don't really have to, see all these people fighting. And back, honestly, sometimes I do get that in my comments, and I kind of encourage it because, the more comments, that means more interactions. That's better for the algorithm. But, you can choose to do as much or as little in terms of interacting with other people, especially the dissenters.
So are you on TikTok, or I'm sorry, on YouTube as well? Or are you just on that one platform?
So primarily on TikTok. I do have a YouTube account where sometimes I post TikToks, but the way the YouTube algorithm works, I've only been posting shorts because my content is pretty short. And with TikTok, they actually are now rewarding longer form content, which is at least over a minute. So unfortunately, I can't really post on there, but I do have an Instagram page, a professional weather Instagram page that I post the videos on. It's Andrew Markowitz WX. Also post things on my Twitter too. And Instagram is kind of rehashing the same things on TikTok, but also just making graphics. Twitter, I kind of like it because it's a different audience. It's, generally a lot of professionals follow me. So I do a lot of graphics with diagrams, X's and O's, just trying to, kind of explain how things are progressing. And just trying to explain my thoughts. So, each platform, it's kind of a different audience, but TikTok is the one that I like the most because that one, it's the most diverse and it's people that, we would otherwise never reach.
Yeah, and the engagement, I will say it's stunning over there. I mean, it's I don't even try, and I'll put some crappy video. I'm not good like you, but some crappy video, and all of a sudden 500,000 views just like that, and it's just serious weather. And I'm glad they're watching it. So that's really interesting to me. So, and here's one thing I want to ask. I know a lot of other questions are waiting here, but I'm having a hard time finding people that want to work here. This new generation, they have no interest in traditional television. It's not relevant to them. They don't watch it. They will never watch it. And accordingly, we have a really hard time filling openings right now. There's a gazillion openings. They have figured out a way to do what they want to do on platforms like TikTok, and they make more money on TikTok than they would make in a television station. And nobody gets rich on television anymore, but I find that interesting. And the question for you is, do you see a day where you will shift, basically make that your career? You'll walk away from the energy sector and just do social media meteorology and let that be the way that you make a living?
That's an interesting question because the idea of being a social media influencer, there are obviously some negatives that come with it, but it is, there's an illusion of a very glamorous lifestyle. In fact, I think a lot of polls today suggest that that's the career that most people going into high school and college, they actually want to aspire to, as opposed to these other more traditional jobs. So, I mean, for me personally, I love what I do in the energy sector. I don't really see, myself leaving. I always thought TikTok was just something that's a side hobby that, I kind of pick up after work, just crank it out. But, if I ever had tens of millions of subscribers, maybe that would change. But yeah, for now, I don't really see that becoming my sole career path. It's just kind of a nice thing to do. And, whatever perks I get with it, that's just an added bonus.
And I must say that I did make $85 on X last week. So I gambled the $8 on X with Elon Musk.
Way to go, James.
Well, and I was hoping I would make 10. Hey man, if I make 12, if I get $12, that's a $4 return. That's a good return. But I made $85. So there you go. See, maybe I'll walk away and just be an X-man or something.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, do you maybe you said this, maybe I missed it, but do you monetize this? Does this monetize or make a little money for you?
I mean, it's certainly not enough for me to quit my job and become an influencer, but there's a couple ways that people make money. So first and foremost, there's a program, it's called the creativity program, where if you have a certain number of followers, then for every video you post that's at least a minute long, for every qualified views, you would get a certain amount of money for that. So, if you have a video that, is like a minute and 10 minutes long and you get about 50,000 views, then you can make a certain amount of money from that. The other way would be doing live streams, is that if you're on for a while and people appreciate your coverage, people will just throw you random gifts. And, it's kind of funny because it's like random emojis, like people will put a captain's hat on me or something, or like big glasses. Like, it's kind of funny, but, sometimes you get some money from that. And, there are actually some people that are streamers and I can't even comprehend how much money they make from that. I don't even know what they do. I'd love to learn more, but it's a shocking amount. But then the third way is that if you get enough of a presence, companies will start reaching out to you and they'll say, hey, we like your content. If you go ahead and produce a video that's an advertisement for us, but in a creative way that's kind of relevant to you, we'll give you a certain amount of money. And those can certainly add up. So, with TikTok, I feel like there's probably more avenues to make money versus the other social medias. And I do think that with how the algorithm works, there's a greater potential to grow much quicker than a lot of the other ones.
Andrew, I have a quick question because I tried doing TikTok for like a minute for Tornado Talk. There is no joking or dancing or cursing when it comes to tornado history, for the most part. Maybe a little cursing once in a while, but for the most part, there's not that. So is there an avenue for folks who want more serious type videos? That's why I kind of backed off of it, because it didn't know if it was worth it. I'm on everything else. And I'm like, do I really want to be part of the talk to add something else out there. And, you know, for like a This Week in Tornado History, which I've actually just kind of made that on our YouTube platform for now, because our topic is very serious. And so is TikTok a platform for something like that?
Yeah. So first of all, Jen, put your TikTok username in the comments, and I'll be happy to give you a follow and review that more in depth after this call. But yeah, you know, it's kind of surprising what people are interested in. You know, it can be the most random niche things, and people will just eat it up. And you know, for me personally, it took over a year and a half of lots of trial and error for me to, you know, actually take off in a place that was starting to gain traction. Like it took me a year and a half to get from 0 to 1,000 followers, probably 8 months to get from 0 to 200 followers. So, you know, I would just say be persistent. And the way that I look at it is, you know, at the end of the day, if you're teaching one person, if you're helping one person, then all of it is worth it. And, you know, that's just what I would focus on, these little victories of people. You know, even if you get 2 comments, if one of them is saying, I never knew this, or this was great, you know, that's what it would be worth it. So I would say if you're already producing content for these other platforms, and that's actually something that, you know, I think every creator should be doing, is that use it everywhere. You know, if you're making a video for YouTube, you can splice it down and put it on TikTok. Something that I notice a lot of people do is that if they have, say, a podcast, they'll do a long form video on YouTube or another platform, but then they'll splice it down into 20, 30-second clips, things that people would talk about, and then that provides traction to other platforms. So, you know, I would say go on every single platform, even Threads, which was, you know, kind of booming for a minute. It's kind of died out since then. I would just say get your voice out there to as many people as possible. And, you know, with time, that follower count will grow. If you're, you know, being persistent, if you recognize, hey, these are the things that I could be doing better, then I think eventually you'll be finding more success. Because again, like I was saying, like it took me forever. I quit multiple times, and, you know, eventually it was just a matter of, you know, keep going at it and figuring out what I did wrong, stepping up the content and the quality of my videos. And eventually that's gotten me to find success. So yeah. And when it comes to the diversifying thing, you know, it's not even just from a revenue standpoint, but it's the idea of, you know, first of all, just reaching a bunch of new people, but it's also, there is fallibility in these social media platforms. You think about, there is some legislation out there of people who are trying to ban TikTok. It's already banned in India. There was some momentum of that earlier in the summer. And so, you know, there are a lot of people who are only on TikTok, for example, and that would decimate their careers overnight. So from that perspective, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, if something like that does happen, or say your account gets hacked or something very unfortunate happens, that you at least have a way to get those people back and can kind of grow it from there. So that was kind of like a long-winded spiel there, but, you know, the moral of the story is try to diversify as much as you can and just be persistent.
What do you think about Ryan Hall?
Oh, okay. So I'm going to give you some pros and cons about him. So, you know, I think in terms of, you know, his live streams, I think he does a great job. I think that he fills a need in that gap that I was talking about, of people who are not getting meteorology from news. And, you know, he's kind of doing, you know, being his Jim Cantori or whoever impression of someone who's telling it like it is, and people are listening to him, and I'm sure he saves some lives. So for that, I think it's, you know, he's doing a great job. Now, I have watched quite a few of his videos, and I will say that, you know, a good chunk of his content, you know, is sound meteorologically. I think it's informative. An average person can understand it. But I think the problem lies with clickbait. You know, and again, a lot of that has to do with that principle of playing the games, that you kind of have to some extent. But then when you're showing something like there's going to be a major hurricane in December on the East Coast, or you're saying we're going to get exactly 4 feet of snow in this location in, you know, we're making the prediction August, we're saying that for the winter, or the one that he just did, which I actually made a reaction video to on TikTok, where he was saying that, oh, I'm guaranteeing a snowstorm for 2024. It's like things like that I think does a disservice to the scientific community. And, you know, the problem is, you know, people see these videos, and that's not to say that everything he said is completely wrong. There is a semblance of truth in the things that he said in that video and some of the other ones. But the problem is the things that get people attention, that's what ultimately makes waves in terms of what draws headlines, what people are talking about at the dinner table or to friends, things like, hey, this is going to be an extreme winter. And now as a meteorologist, you kind of roll your eyes and it's like, I didn't predict that. And we kind of have to walk it back. So again, I think there are certainly some good things that Ryan has done. I think Ryan has done the best out of anybody in terms of filling that void. But I think the fact that he doesn't have the credentials, he's not a degreed meteorologist, and he often resorts to doing this hype and the clickbait. And he's kind of made fun of that too on social media. He's kind of, shrugged it off and made jokes about it, which, I don't think too many people really appreciate it. So there is certainly value to what he does, but I also think that people need to be careful about, his credentials. And I think that we should, ultimately we're the ones as degreed scientists who should be bearing the responsibility of providing this information. So I do think that he's opened up this idea that, hey, we as scientists need to do a better job of reaching these people. But unfortunately, we have to play defense as well and kind of walk back some of these extreme things.
How do you do that? Like, how do you differentiate between someone who is actually a degreed, certified, credentialed meteorologist versus someone who's considered a weather expert by the general community based on the number of followers? I think there's a disconnect there. People tend to associate number of followers with being some sort of subject matter expert, which is wildly inaccurate on social media, in my opinion.
Well, that's a tough problem for us to solve. There are some of these people that have hundreds of thousands of followers, and then there's degreed meteorologists who post reaction videos with maybe a couple hundred followers. They get maybe 1,000 views. And, it's very tough because, the thing about TikTok is you see a video, you like it, you do whatever with it. Maybe you just close it out, but the vast majority of people are not actively going to click on his profile and say, hey, who is this guy? What are his credentials? They're just going to see the video and move on. So that's one of the tough things about TikTok versus other social media where you can be a little more critical of that. And so, I guess something that you could do, you could just kind of restate your credentials in, your description in the first few. Something I see a lot of experts do is they talk about, hey, I've been a doctor for X number of years. I graduated from this school. I'm a healthcare professional, things like that, just to give yourself authority and, instead of just being some guy. But it is very tough because, you have to figure out a way to grab someone's attention right away. And, it's just about the balance and somewhat playing the game, which, I don't like that that's what it has to be. I wish it could just be to the point where you're giving information, but unfortunately there's just that second element that, you kind of have to balance out here. So, I try to do whatever I can to prove my credentials. Like I tell people that I'm a degreed meteorologist. Like I have the information that's transparent with people, at least to the best of my ability. But at the end of the day, the average person on TikTok is just not going to click on my name and say, hey, this is Andrew Markowitz. He has a degree. He works in the private sector. I can trust him. They kind of just have to trust the words that I'm saying. And, that's the onus that all of us have to do. It's that, we want to do whatever we can to be portrayed as experts. But, there are obviously people who, say these things. Maybe people believe them because they have a certain number of followers, but they may not necessarily have that. So it's a very, very tough thing to solve. And, I just think we have to be to the point and we have to actually reach out to those people, just find a way to connect with the people that we've kind of been overlooking.
Andrew, if you had to guess, how many people in that pool of consumers of social media actually care about credentials that aren't just, I'm looking at what's happening in Atlanta right now, and the Twitter feed does nothing to separate a credentialed X content generator from somebody that's not. So, I think it's an important space to be in. It's an important discussion to have about credentials. I just don't know is it going to matter to 95% of people consuming social media?
It is tough to say. I think when it comes to life-saving situations, like if you have a big hurricane, you're going to want to make sure that there's an expert making those decisions. When it comes to businesses, they're not just going to hire this random Joe Schmo who talks about weather. They're going to actually look into it. So it's kind of the same principle where, in order for people to trust you, you actually have to back it up with your education and your way that you communicate. Like I think Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, that's a little bit easier to do nowadays. I feel like the ones who are educated are for the most part the ones being amplified. There's a good correlation between that. But with TikTok, just given the nature of how the algorithm works, it's just much tougher to do so. And if I had to put a number, I do get a lot of comments that do question my credentials. And, I think that's a fair question because they see a guy, I don't have a blue check. I have a decent following, but nothing spectacular. Not a lot of people would be able to recognize me off the street or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think most people just care about, okay, what does this mean for me? And that's about it. They're getting the information and whatever they do with it, they're not going to really question it. And that's something I try to emphasize too, just the ability to think critically. And it's just extremely tough. That's something that I'm trying to figure out how to do better at myself too.
I mean, we see this from other media operations too, and I'm sure James sees it, where people ask him about, hey, I saw this forecast on Facebook for the coldest Arctic blast in 10 years coming in 21 days. I mean, we get it, and it comes from the same people every time, yet people still continue to consume that. And I mean, I guess it's great that they're turning to someone they may perceive as more credible to ask questions about its veracity, but I don't know. It's still kind of mind numbing.
Well, that's kind of the biggest problem we face is that, the most recent example that I've seen were those incredulous winter forecasts that got thousands and thousands of shares. And, I found that the best thing to do is to just, you see these things, you don't give them engagement. So you kind of just take screenshots, you block out the name because you don't want to get them traffic to their page. And you just kind of explain like, hey, this 21-day forecast, we can't predict that. This is just purely clickbait. And, if you're just direct about, why this is the case, you just kind of explain very quickly, like why people are sharing these things and why it's for nefarious reasons in a lot of cases. And, the people that you should be trusting, the NHC, your weather service office, your local meteorologist. And, that's all you can really do. It's a lot of playing defense because at the end of the day, you're not going to really be able to stop these people from posting clickbait. You can report them, but I don't think it really does anything. So all you can do is just kind of explain why this is wrong and, what the actual information is. And, the fact that people are kind of corroborating with the meteorologist saying, hey, I found this forecast, is that legit? That does show that, hey, people are, consuming the weather. There is a need for that, but people also want to be critical about where it comes from. And so, we still do need to figure out how to utilize that expertise that we all have.
And I usually reply, well, there's not a 0 chance of that happening because it is 3 weeks away and weather happens. But it's still kind of maddening to have to frame a response in, well, yeah, theoretically this could happen. I mean, we've got record-breaking cold because we have record-breaking cold.
Yeah, it's interesting. Neil just put in the chat exactly what where I was going in my own thoughts. I really do wonder, there's a really great set of master's theses out there for anyone who's listening who'd be interested in a couple of things. One, we wring our hands over worry that these, exaggerated forecasts have some negative consequences, but I don't think we really know if they do. And this is where we really have to start exploring and understand the consequences of some of these practices in the communication ecosystem, because it isn't just any single voice. And what people are experiencing is a whole lot more like an orchestra with a lot of instruments all playing either discordantly or sort of together, and not just experiencing single individual pieces of information from individual sources most of the time. And so it's a really interesting thing to think about, well, what's the influence of just this one if it goes out of tune? And can it cause some bad effect? I think there's also a question of the people who are seeking this information, the ones who are getting it. Are they catastrophists? Are they people who sort of are always on alert? Are they, do they have a particular kind of predilection that you're just not going to fix. If it's not this, it's something. You know, they're just very attentive to potential threat and very interested in it for whatever reason. And it, you know, it might not bleed over to the rest of society in the way that we fear that it might. And so it's the action of, you know, when a real event comes along, it's that the orchestra is getting louder because more voices are joining and talking about it. So actually, it might be the best thing for us to do is just ignore a crazy person who's a little bit out of tune instead of trying to mask him with more loud noises, because loud noise maybe is what people are taking to be the cue that something needs to be paid attention to. Sorry, I'm mixing metaphors here, but I think you guys understand what I'm saying. I think that there's just a lot in this that we don't know. And I caution us to, you know, before we feel too anxious and worried, I think that we need to explore that a little bit more and understand what our own contributions are to those outcomes. You know, is there bad to be done by even trying to tamp down the negative or the things that we think are extreme? I'll be honest, I don't think we know the answer to those questions. It's a toughie, and I'm interested in what you think about that, Andrew. You must wonder about that all the time.
All the time. And, you know, I guess what I would wonder about is how exactly would you quantify it? You know, you say that, is it better to just ignore these extremists altogether or kind of react to it? And, you know, I certainly can see both arguments for that. I mean, you know, some things that are just totally outrageous, I don't even bother responding, because part of that is I just don't want to give any of these people more traffic than they're already getting. But at the same time, you know, I see this as a pool of people that has a void, and the void is being filled by garbage. And, you know, that's the problem here, is that I feel like if we do ignore these things, then that's all they're going to be getting. And it's a very tough issue, and I can certainly see the other side. But you know, at the end of the day, we have to make sure our voices are out there, that factual information is being disseminated to those people. And, you know, I'd love to be able to see if there's a way that could be quantified about which method is better, because I could certainly see upsides to both.
You could imagine a world where if you were savvy about it, you could try to, you know, be attentive to some of the more common sources. I'm just going to give away a methodology for some grad students who are listening or their faculty, but you could pay attention to some of the generators of these extreme forecasts and find cases where they're forecasting for something very extreme at a very far distance out, and then conduct some longitudinal sampling, you know, over time for some set within some set of the population. I would do random draw. I wouldn't do the same people over and over again because they know they're being watched. But I would do like a random draw from within that area or region that could possibly be affected to gauge, you know, whatever the impact might be. Now, you'd have to try to sample the followers of that person who are in that area. You know, these media niches are so small that a random draw from the whole population is not going to work. It would be tough. I mean, the bottom line is, it would be difficult. Having, you know, putting sensors into the atmosphere is so much easier than constructing a really good sample frame for populations that could be experiencing some of these things. It's just such a nuanced thing to do. But I do think it could be done. And moreover, I think it's extremely important to do, because we have these indications every so often you get of there being big effects. You know, I think of a couple of years ago, there's a certain gentleman who has a long history, well before social media was a thing, of getting in the weather services business in different ways and putting forward, he's sort of the early grandfather of taking the crazy forecasts and putting them out for the universe, and had a very large following. And, you know, there are people in New Orleans who were worried that there was going to be a hurricane that would hit them. And, you know, they had enormous numbers of people who were thinking about evacuating and, you know, just cramming, you know, the lines of their local police and fire and emergency management. And there was actually notable societal disruption. And I do not know, sitting here, if that has happened again. And that would be really interesting to know if it happens when these things, you know, when these forecasts go out, or has society adjusted because they know that this stuff is out there in the media sphere, and it's just only the sentries who are out there looking for stuff to care about, and, you know, like they're buzzing trying to find these things, but it doesn't have these bigger societal effects because the rest of society acts to dampen that, that wave. So it would be really interesting, difficult, but we need this. We need this to know if this is a problem.
Well, I will say that one of the first weather memories I had was kind of this example of hysteria. There was a March 2001 snowstorm in the Northeast. It was expected to be a record-breaker storm, and there was a very infamous incident with the meteorologist in Philadelphia where they put on a crawl at the bottom of the screen where it said something like "historic snowstorm is coming." This was several days out, and there was a lot of hype. People became panicked by it, and then the storm comes in, ends up being a massive bust, and there is only about an inch of snow, I think. And of course, a lot of people were very upset. In fact, that meteorologist who made the forecast, his reputation was forever tarnished by that. And I always wondered, reading about the case, I was only 4 years old when it happened, but was there that idea of mass hysteria that we were talking about? Did people waste resources? Were people spooked for this disaster scenario? And then what I would wonder after that, which I think would be more consequential, would be the idea of, okay, well, if we heard about this event, it didn't happen. There was a meteorologist who told me that. Does this make us distrust future forecasts? And thus, in that case, does that make us less prepared for whenever the next disaster does strike? So, that's something I think would need to be investigated with that study as well.
Hey, Kim, would you briefly kind of go through this AMS proposal for a new certified digital meteorologist certification level?
Sure. It sounds like Troy, you should jump in here because he's been pulled in on this effort. Actually, Troy, would you like to go for it? I just brought up that as an incoming commissioner, I get to sit in on council meetings. So I saw that they're moving along on this process to create the certified digital meteorologist. What's going on, Troy, and how are you?
Well, they're basically, they've come to our CBM exam review committee, of which I chair, because they've got to have some type of testing mechanism. And I think that's all I'm free to say at this point. But I'm just telling you that they've got to have a testing process that this, and we have a testing process in place for the CBM. And so we visited about that, but I think probably, Kim, you'd have more information about basically where we're working toward. I mean, I think we're pretty close to coming up with something, what I understand.
That's the impression that I got too. It seems that we're pretty far down the tracks. So this could be something that comes along in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
And it isn't, Andrew, you're talking about, well, what difference might it make? I think it is interesting to think about on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, just what that blue check meant, and that we could make something that's sort of like that goes across platforms for meteorologists, like some kind of something that in these internet spaces indicates, that there is something out there in the real world that says this person is legit. Because
but Kim, doesn't that blue check just mean you paid money?
You're right.
Now it does.
Yeah, exactly.
Twitter, when it was the formerly granted based on who actually checked. You're right. Yes. Now it means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, ideally, it would be great if these social media content companies would curate certified content generators a little bit more. But goodness, we can't even get X to allow automated tornado warning tweets out.
No, that's true.
Well, I remember that day in early July where I think it was a Saturday. There was severe weather in the eastern U.S. and you had the rate limit exceed a day where I couldn't even see my Twitter feed, and something like that was disastrous because, I'm sure it's maybe not a large amount of people, but I'm sure there are some people that get alerts on their phone for when a tornado comes. So to have that ability limited, that was a major pitfall for, any NWS office or a broadcast person who is not only trying to disseminate information, but also the other way where we're trying to get confirmation of there was a tornado here or seeing these reports. So, it just goes to show you there is fallibility with relying too much on social media at this point, especially when, things like we've seen over the past year, they can change on a dime depending on who's in charge.
something that couldn't have possibly been foreseen, in all of the craziness of all of these platforms. The Twitter throttling of, with the volume of warnings. I think about how in 2007, we changed the warning system from county-based to polygon-based warnings. And in so doing, frequently increased the number of warnings that we're issuing as a whole. And you could definitely see that in that severe event. I mean, it was just carpet bombed with severe warnings. And if you're throttling the volume through the platforms people are using to access the warnings, gosh, talk about a completely unforeseen consequence of a policy change. That it really, everything we're doing, we have to be ready in the weather service and in all of our corners where we're trying to communicate information. We have to be ready to change all of our practices on a dime, subject to the whims and wiles of the mediums that are transmitting our information to people. And it's almost overwhelming to really, really draw in what that means. And I think it's so good that there are people like you who are brave enough to be at this frontier where all these things are happening and trying to be that voice of reasonable, trustworthy information in all those places, because it will take just that amount of energy and innovativeness to keep up with this. We don't have a choice. We have to have people like you who are leading the way and helping us do this.
Yeah, and I don't want to be the only one. I want to have as many people as possible with these credentials getting on there and reaching these people. So the more Mets that are on there willing to kind of crank out a video in their spare time, just give this information, I'd say the better. And, I'd say another interesting thing is, because you're talking to a non-traditional audience, it does make you kind of think hard about, how you communicate the weather to people. And I think it makes you better at your regular job too, because it makes you think about, okay, what's most important? What are things that people, want to know? And what's going to make them understand? And, for me, like, I do get the idea of you want to get to the point, you want to give people the information, but I also like teaching people things too. So like the video I did yesterday about severe weather in the Eastern US, like I threw in some things about theta E, about wind shear. I just kind of explained very briefly what it meant. And, I get questions all the time about, people who are very interested in how, not just what's going to happen, but the science behind it. Now, majority of it is people who just care about the backyard, but, there are a lot of people that are interested in, the why that's happening. And so, I don't really envy the people who run these social media accounts, just because of the volume and just also, the nonsense you have to deal with from other people. But, it's a job that someone has to tough out. And I think if as many people are willing to take the plunge, then, we're better off for it.
Let me ask real quick. We have to take a break in a second, but Andrew, let's say that we have a high school senior, a college freshman in atmospheric science, and they want to reach the masses like I did in my generation on television, but they want to do it on social media. They want to make that's their career choice. They would like to be an influencer with a degree in meteorology, doing credible information on some of these platforms. Just some quick advice for maybe an 18, 19-year-old that wants to do this.
Well, I would say first and foremost, just if this is what you want to do, you have to be persistent. And that means, a lot of trial and error. You have to see, what are the things that I could be doing better? Every single video you watch, you have to analyze and be like, okay, these are the things that I did well. These are the things that I could do better. And you kind of have to not only do that on your own videos, but also following other people's examples. Now, for meteorology, there really weren't any good examples that I used. A lot of it was just applied from other sectors. Like on my feed, I get a lot of sports people. And so I see the things that they do to build an audience. And I'm like, all right, like some of these transitions they do or this style, these are things I can incorporate from the weather. So I would say just, analyze yourself and then analyze other people. I would also say, just to be straight up, understand that it's a pretty low probability for people to actually make it. Again, a lot of it is people just give up. But the idea of growing from 0 to 2 million followers, it's a microscopic percentage of people. So I would not go in with the idea of becoming an influencer. I would just try to make content, just kind of do it on the side for fun. To have that not be your first goal here, kind of have it as a backup plan or at least as a hobby. And then if it grows, then you can kind of start to think about it more seriously. But it is certainly becoming a viable path for the small percentage of people who actually make it. And there are a lot of people who can live a very successful and fulfilling life doing that, but you also have to be aware of the pitfalls that come with it as well. And a lot of that has to do with, mental health issues that's associated with, this constant need for dopamine for not only yourself, but for your audience. And that's something, I honestly deal with myself too. And it comes in a few ways. It's number one, the idea that if you bear the responsibility of giving people life-saving information, you automatically have this pressure that, hey, I have to post every single day about every single severe weather threat. And that's just not feasible for you. And so if there's a time where I'm not able to do that, sometimes, you may have the feeling that you're letting your audience down. And that can be really taking a toll on your mental health. Also, just you get a lot of mean comments no matter what you do. And, a lot of that, you just have to have very thick skin and just, obviously you should read the comments to some extent so that you can understand, okay, like this is what my audience thinks. These are the things that I can do better. But you should also learn to develop that, hey, these people are saying these things because they have their own insecurities in their lives. They are envious of you or they're jealous of you. And, the comments, it's probably true for a lot of people on TV too, and whether it's people sending in snail mail or calling on a telephone or making a mean Facebook comment, all of that, I think certainly can take a toll on mental health. So it is something you have to be careful of. So if you are going into that field, certainly be consistent, but also don't be afraid to do things outside of that as well. To take breaks, don't make that your entire life. And yeah, just, we need more people in that space who are willing to help people. So if that is something you want to do, I would certainly encourage you to do so. In fact, I'm willing to offer advice to anybody who's willing to do that. But at the end of the day, I just think you need to have a plan A. Don't have that being your plan A right away. But yeah, hopefully anybody who's watching the stream that's interested in that lifestyle, hopefully, I can be a resource for you.
Awesome. And I'm thankful you mentioned the mental health part of it. And listen, I dabble in this stuff. I mean, my primary career is traditional television, but I dabble in social media heavily, and it can weigh on you, even for a crusty old guy that's been around here forever. The negativity, like last night, for example, I had over 2,000, this is no exaggeration, private messages on Facebook. And these are all amazing images of shelf clouds, rainbows, lightning, sunsets, great stuff. And I try to acknowledge everybody. I like to do that with nothing else, a thumbs up, thank you. And it becomes overwhelming, and it can really eat at you. So that's something you have to really watch. And I've seen a lot of younger people not doing weather, but they're influencers in other ways. And it really, really brings them down to a point where they struggle. So, but anyway, we have to take a break. We're going to do Tony Rice and his astronomy report. We're going to do Jen's This Week in Tornado History. Jen, we're going to come back and do a little bit of email, if that's okay with you. And then we're going to do Weather Roundup. We'll talk about hurricane season and more. We'll do Picks of the Week and more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
As the number of Starlink satellites has grown in recent years, more than 4,500 as of the last launch, so have the concerns about their impact to astronomy. You see interesting things in the night sky? They're really dim. And this requires long exposure photography, and that can be spoiled by these desk-sized satellites as they streak through the images. SpaceX did respond in recent years to these concerns by re-engineering the satellites themselves, reducing their reflectivity. And that new design, it will replace the entire fleet faster than you might think. According to Aerospace Corporation's Center for Orbital Reentry and Debris Studies, an average of 2 Starlink satellites deorbit each week after a few months to a few years in orbit. But those changes are not really helping radio astronomers, like those at the Low Frequency Array Telescope in the northern Netherlands, who recently detected electromagnetic radiation from Starlink. All satellites, they have electronics on board that do release a small amount of electromagnetic signals, about as much as a TV. But radio telescopes are very, very sensitive. They're able to detect a cell phone on the moon. And if radio astronomers are seeing interference from 4,500 Starlink satellites, they're growing concerned about the impact that the planned 42,000 will have on the study of stars, galaxies, and black holes. Elsewhere in the sky, look for Jupiter shining brightly in the pre-dawn sky this week. And in the evening, look for Mars low on the western horizon. It'll settle up alongside a sliver of moon on Friday evening. Look a few degrees below, and you'll find Mercury. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me in RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, we are going way back to August 19th of 1890 to a significant event in northeastern Pennsylvania. 2 tornadoes moved through parts of Luzerne County. The first actually began in Columbia County in the northern part of Greenwood Valley. It would travel 25 miles, ending 2 miles southwest of Lehman Center in Luzerne County. Along its path, it would cause major destruction, and based on documentation of the damage, an F3 rating has been assigned by the National Weather Service Binghamton. Homes were leveled near Benton, and the town of Harveyville was nearly completely destroyed. Eyewitnesses in one area described the tornado as, quote, a silvery color and seemed like a stream pouring down into the darker mass of clouds at the earth. Sadly, 4 were killed by this violent twister and more than 10 injured. As this tornado dissipated, a new one formed 6 miles to the south. It began about 1.7 miles west of Nanticoke. It followed the Susquehanna River to the east and northeast to Corncrest and then veered northeast into Wilkes-Barre. Roofs were seen being lifted into the air. 5 passenger train cars were thrown onto their sides. The damage in town suggests that the tornado had multiple vortices. Strong, well-built brick structures were leveled, while weak frame buildings beside them were left untouched. Over 400 buildings were damaged or destroyed in the Wilkes-Barre area. Tragically, 16 were killed and over 60 injured. It is interesting to read newspaper accounts of these events from the 1800s, as they have a tendency to share some very odd, possibly exaggerated accounts. One such account was that on South Canal Street, a woman who was caught outside when the tornado struck was supposedly stripped of all of her clothes. She reportedly, quote, ran distressed into the nearest house.
Wow. Woo, all right.
Convenient explanation there.
Yeah. Let's roll that email music.
Yes, I guess we do. We do make jokes of the tornado history. Never mind. I guess maybe I could be on the talk. Thanks to everyone for all your emails. I'm going to go to a couple back in July, but we've received all your emails. Thank you for videos and all your show requests and all that stuff. We get all of that. We appreciate it. But this goes to our friend James Lewis. He has a question. Recently, there's been news about offshore wind power in the Gulf of Mexico and East Coast. The question I have is the obvious one to tropical cyclone enthusiasts anyway. How will offshore wind farms deal with hurricanes? Has NOAA studied the issue? Can they potentially take advantage of strong winds associated with weaker parts of tropical cyclones? Any thoughts on that? I'm looking at Neil actually on that. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, NOAA's not necessarily looking at that. It's a little bit out of their jurisdiction. There's a Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and that really looks at that stuff. I think from their perspective, it would not be about wind generation. It'd probably be, I mean, Andrew's probably the most qualified to answer this. My guess is it'd be feathering the blades or doing something to prevent the things from getting destroyed would be what they're worried about.
Any thoughts on that, Andrew?
I wouldn't say that I've really dealt much with offshore wind farms, just given where I've been kind of forecasting for. But I imagine that there is certainly amount of weatherization that there would be put in place, not only before or like during a hurricane, but at least in terms of when you actually create the wind farm. There's a certain standard that you have to go by. So we actually have some offshore wind farms in Texas, which has seen some hits recently. So I'm not sure that that area has been tested, but that's one of the areas that I'd be most watching too, just because of that ramp up.
I should also mention from other equities within NOAA, particularly the fisheries side, they do get involved in a lot of the permitting and siting of these wind farms from the environmental impact statements because of, marine mammals and things like that.
Very good. One more email here from our friend Rick Halterman. Once again, the family weather guy turns to the WeatherBrains for help. I've had a request from friends and family to provide the National Weather Service hourly forecast to them. And so he started pulling together a page. Before releasing it to them for use, I would like to provide some probability context to the information for them to use when evaluating the info, some indication of how the accuracy drops off as each forecast is further out toward 120 hours. He was thinking of maybe using background colors. And then he started wondering, oh, maybe they would start looking at that as perceive the color as an indicator of risk instead of likelihood of occurrence. Is there a common way to indicate probability in the weather enterprise?
You want to take it, Neil? He's shaking his head no. I love the idea, and there have been apps in the past I've seen that have done a little bit of something like this, where there's never different ways that you can construct error. You can try to use the error sort of endemic to the forecast in different ways. There's a variety of ways you can try to show how variable, the temperature forecast is based on some ensemble approach, hoping and praying, crossing your fingers through your ensemble, it all matches the underlying distribution of realistic possibilities. You could also have, some like sort of historic error that you bake in, and then you can go off to climatology. And one of the things that you tend to see used as a visual cue for uncertainty is just graying. So, gray is sort of the visual cue for uncertainty. There's been a little bit of work done on this in some of data visualization, but, taking the color, whatever hue you use to render the variable on your graph, and just, making it desaturated with distance and time, or with increasing variability, whatever gives you a visual cue that this is a less certain kind of forecast. So lots and lots of ways to do it. This is something that I think our field is really grappling with right now. How do we do it? And where we go with that is really important for everything you've intuited. You want to help people understand, even if you give them your sort of best guess out at some point in the future, that there are some points in the future where there's not a lot of value to a very specific forecast. And what you should be thinking about is a range of possibilities, and you trend toward, here's maybe what the seasonal outlook is, or subseasonal outlook is, and where it could trend compared to climatology and what that could look like. And it just is a totally different thing from having an hourly graph. So you've asked a wonderful question. I think what you should do is play around with some renderings, send them our way. We'd be happy to give you comments.
That's a great idea. Thank you so much, Kim. And thanks to everybody for writing to us. Email at weatherbrains.com if you have show suggestions, questions for the panel here. We will get to those every week as much as we can. And check out our newsletter as well. You have to sign up for that on our website. You can get that every Thursday morning into your email inbox. Back to you, James.
When the weather ball is red, warmer weather is ahead. When the weather ball is white, colder weather is in sight. When the weather ball is green, no change in the weather is foreseen. When colors blink by night or day, precipitation's on the way.
So let's start with a hurricane update. Dr. Neil Jacobs, here we are, August 14th. NOAA kind of kicked up their numbers here last week. What are your thoughts on what's to come?
I'm not too impressed with what I see. I mean, there's a ton of heat there. It's got to go somewhere at some point. That's a big problem. But unless the shear backs off, I think you're still just going to see stuff damped out. But I mean, with this much heat buildup, any backing off in the shear, you're liable to see some explosive sudden development somewhere.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet, but I thought it was interesting that NOAA increased their forecast. I forget the exact numbers, but they did that in their update last week. So we'll see. Boy, yeah. Did you see that wave over Africa? The wave that's about to come off the coast of Africa looked awfully impressive on the satellite images. So, but we'll see if it can, if it can overcome the dry air, the subsidence, and the shear. but it's El Nino doing its thing. But as we do this here on the 14th, it's pretty quiet. Andrew, what are your thoughts on hurricane season?
There's certainly kind of a balancing act here between the El Nino climatology, where you have, kind of the wind shear acting as a counteracting force between these sea surface temperatures that are the hottest that we've ever seen. So, I think the next few weeks are going to be make or break between, these outlooks that have been becoming more and more extreme versus something that's more tempered. So, I mean, for me, I don't want to come out on a limb and make a call here, but, I certainly could see where these higher end forecasts don't really come to fruition. But that being said, it's not necessarily about the quantity that matters. It's more so the the quality, so to speak. It only takes one. Like you think about 1992, it was a very inactive season, but you had Andrew. So, it does alarm me the fact that if we do get a storm that's developing in the basin, with how hot the sea surface temperatures are, there is something that, if it gets in the right place, it could strengthen. And if it takes the wrong track, that could be problematic. But, we'll just have to see. There's some competing forces here, and it's kind of a unique case from what we've seen versus previous years, these two counteracting forces.
Yep. So we'll see. And again, we're here in mid-August. We have a long way to go. We've had some pretty nasty hurricanes in November before, even December in some years. So we'll see. But again, to save time here, again, I think everybody kind of talked about weather in their neck of the woods as the show started. So let's go right into picks of the week. And this is where we're going to go around the horn. Everybody's going to share something weather related that's kind of cool. This can be a social media post, website, hardware, software, anything that's interesting. And just to start, my pick is, again, of the 2,000 videos and photographs I got last night, one was pretty darn cool. It was a shot of a very vivid rainbow with lightning in real time, which I just love that shot. That's one of the best weather shots I've seen in a long time. All right, so let's go down to Troy. Troy, what is your pick of the week?
I stumbled across this one, and I'm not sure how many people have seen it. You may have seen it, but there's a guy by the name of Dylan Flynn. I think Dylan was at the National Hurricane Center, and when he was there, they had taken an old publication originally done, I think back around 2000, on tropical cyclones in the Atlantic Basin, essentially. And he had rewritten, and it's only been about a month or so, it's been put online, a PDF entitled The Mariner's Tropical Cyclone Guide. Again, found on the National Hurricane Center page. I put the PDF in the email, Bill, as well as a link. Google wouldn't let me see the direct links. I won't say what I think about Google. But bottom line is I sent the PDF, which we can see. And if you really want a kind of a good basic view, Dylan has done a great job, in my view, in kind of scanning over this document. And I'd be interested. Maybe I've just missed it. I don't know if anyone else has seen it before.
Very cool. And again, all these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Let's go to James Adelot before he has to do the 9 o'clock news. James, what you got?
I've got a PBS article on it's kind of a timeline of a lot of stuff that went wrong with the Maui wildfires. A lot of missed opportunities there for increased awareness for the citizens, and just kind of how it all came unraveled. So it's definitely sobering. There are a lot of similarities with the campfire and Paradise with topography and limitations and just not able to get out or get the message out.
Wow. Okay. I'll be looking forward to reading that one. Jen, what is your pick of the week? And real quick, while we got you on the horn, kind of tell us quickly about the synopsis of your trip last week.
It was amazing. I took two members of the Tornado Talk team, Zach and Nelson, and we toured different history centers and libraries and archives and met a lot of folks for research on the 1974 super outbreak. And that is our next project. It'll be a multi-year project. It was overwhelmingly good. We met survivors. I'll tell briefly the most impactful story was a lady who came into Winston County, and she had gone through the tornado. It was the end of the Guin tornado as it went through east of Haleyville, and she was in the outskirts, and she told her story. She was injured. Her two daughters were injured, and they were on their way to the cellar, and her mother-in-law was killed. And her daughter was right near her mother-in-law when it happened, and her daughter never really got over it. And she was in tears at first, and then she physically just broke down. I mean, and so it just shows that it doesn't matter when these events occur, they still have a lasting impact on your lives. I was so honored that she shared with us, and we'll be sharing her story. And my pick of the week is tied to the trip. And I've used this as a pick before. Please visit your local library, your history centers, your archives. Those folks are amazing. They are trying to preserve history. And of course, we're looking at tornado history, but they're trying to preserve history of the community and the county, and the wealth of knowledge that they have. And they just, they just do it because they have a heart for it, just like we do here at Tornado Talk. We have a heart for telling these stories. So important to preserve history, is by learning from the past that you can prepare for the current situations that you're going through and the future. And it's truly amazing. So please try to frequent those places and visit them, and show your support to those areas of your community.
Excellent. And again, it's great to see you. And Chris Darden said he was glad you could stop by and he enjoyed the chat.
Great.
So
yeah, he was awesome. It was so good to see you. We got a chance to sit and watch James broadcast. It was so cool. And you literally are in a closet.
Yes,
when
yes.
you do the show, I couldn't believe it.
This is the WeatherBrains corporate headquarters right here in the closet. All right, Kim, give us a good pick. Go.
All right. Well, originally I found the same thing that OK James had found. So I'm going to take another tack to the Maui situation. I think when all is said and done, by the time we tally up the impacts from this, I think we're all going to be horrified and stunned. I don't think that we are remotely done anywhere close to the actual death toll, which, part of it, part of my suspicion is just what they talked about when they found the first 70 or so bodies. They were all outside and trying to flee. So we have not even done anything for people who were in those over 2,000 structures that were incinerated. And it's calling to mind for me, I grew up in Chicago, and even growing up there almost, 100 years after that fire, it was still such a part of our culture and awareness. And, I grew up singing these very actually dark Girl Scout songs about the Chicago fire. It is one of those things that I think this one, the campfire was horrific in California a couple of years ago, the Paradise Fire. And we recently had that, the author of the book on to talk about that even. This one is just unbelievably jarring in even more ways. And I think we're going to have a lot of grappling we're going to do with it for a while. The article that I post has some interesting language in it where some of the officials in Hawaii are being interviewed, and they're talking about, this is the largest natural disaster that they've ever experienced, and something that's really, something that the disaster community, like the set of practitioners and scholars who work in disasters, wants people to know is that there is no such thing as a natural disaster, and it is absolutely the case for Maui. A lot of what you saw, the ignition for the fuels, was from invasive plants that were inhabiting that island, and that changed the face of the way that drought worked, the drought resilience of the flora, and that set the stage for the tinderbox that became Western Maui. And we absolutely have to acknowledge that it's that combined with the infrastructure, that surrounded the people, and that there was, those were starting to learn this sense of, wildfire threat isn't a big threat for us, that maybe anyone who lives at the wildland urban interface is going to have to reckon with the fact that that is just not true for most places now. It's not true for the Pacific Northwest, where there have been huge fires that have raged in Oregon, outside of Seattle. It's not true for Colorado. It's not true for Canada. And it is also not true for Hawaii. And this is something that we're going to be dealing with everywhere. I hope people pay attention to this and heed the warning that it is bringing to us about what the future really holds. We like to talk about severe weather a lot on this show. And I think the next century is going to be marked by fire. I think that's going to be where a lot of our attention is going to be drawn, because these events are going to be our catastrophic killers.
We have to learn. We have to look at this and learn. And that's great. Again, Kim, thank you so much. Great comments, and we look forward to that. All right, Neil, let's go to you for a pick of the week. Go.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, did we lose him?
Copperhead got him.
There he is.
There he is.
Yeah, that was weird. My internet like flaked out right at the worst time. Yeah, so my pick of the week is the Skylab 5.0 release from the Joint Center for Satellite Data Assimilation. This is the full JEDI data assimilation package, everything you could possibly want in there to initialize any model configuration you want. So land, ocean, atmosphere, 3D VAR, 4D VAR, you name it. It's all free on GitHub.
Outstanding. The price is right. Some cool stuff. All right, Andrew, we've stalled long enough. Give us something good. Go.
Yeah, so the most striking image that I saw in the past week, this is kind of going in a little bit of a different direction, but I believe it was last Saturday, the MCV that was over the Midwest. And to me, that was one of the most remarkable radar images I had ever seen. Because if you looked at it, it literally looked like a hurricane that was in place over the Midwest. And I kind of made a video just explaining what it was and kind of why it took that shape, but I've never seen anything so photogenic like that. And, I guess the idea that, number one, things like that can actually happen. And, MCVs are something that you can't really predict with as good of accuracy as, just the regular line of storms. These things just kind of come out, unexpectedly, and they kind of not only put a wrench into things in the current day, but also moving forward if you extrapolate the storm system's movement toward the east. So I found that piece of imagery to be extremely remarkable. And, it just really goes back to why I love the weather. It's just, I'm always learning about things, and, I'm always amazed by, what Mother Nature has to offer.
Yeah, that was way too cool. That was a really photogenic MCV on the radar. There's no doubt about that. All right, Bill Murray, go.
Yeah, James, I'll take the foghorn for my pick just because I love the dulcet tones of the foghorn. But I do have some great guests coming up. Thanks to Andrew tonight for being on here. It was fabulous discussion with you. Dr. Sally Potter will join us next Monday night. And then North Puget Sound meteorologist Henry Buhner will join us on the 28th. And then we're going to have an SPC panel on September 5th. So those are just some of the shows we got to look forward to. A couple of tornado warnings in eastern Tennessee now in the Tri-Cities area. Fortunately, the storms over North Alabama have weakened a little bit in the last 30 minutes. So no warnings there right now, but we do have a severe thunderstorm watch till 2 a.m. tonight.
All right. And let's see. Andrew, plug your TikTok account. Go, man. Let's get some new followers. We'll get you some creepers from this show. Go.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of go down the line. So my TikTok is Andrew Markowitz 96. So that's where I post my content first. Try to make videos every day, or at least whenever there's something interesting about the weather, going live whenever there's severe weather, which is something I'm trying to work on, trying to make that better. I think I'm going to be able to have big improvements coming up with that. I also posted on my Instagram. It's Andrew Markowitz WX. And I also have a Twitter, X, whatever you call it, Andrew or A Markowitz WX or A Markowitz WX. And then I also have a Facebook page. So I try to be on all the social medias, trying to reach as many audiences as possible. Hopefully you guys will follow me along as well. And, I want to extend the offer that I made earlier in the show, in that if there's anybody who's interested in learning more about meteorology, whether it's with TikTok or just the field in general, DMs are always open. I'm always happy to talk to people who are interested in learning more, whether it's, someone who is a high school student thinking about going in it as a career, or just someone who's just a regular enthusiast. I'm always happy to talk to people.
That's awesome. Well, again, Andrew, thank you. It's been a fun show, and we appreciate you being here. And for those that don't know or new, We are typically on the air Monday nights live at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But we know that most of you listen to the audio podcast, and that's awesome as well. So if you want to get in touch with us, the email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. Fun show. Thanks,
Yeah, great show,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks,
you.
Andrew.
Thank you,
Andrew,
Yeah.
thank you so much. That was
Come back and
good.
see us.